I'm in a gym and there's literally a 220 Romex pigtail hanging out of the wall, and it's about, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches away from some guy's leg as he's doing squats. And it's literally just hanging out of the wall.
So this problem was identified, and then the guy in charge said, it doesn't really matter. If something happens, we can take it. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Travis, and with me today I got Ron Becker, or some people know him as KC Beck, and why don't you start off explaining the nickname here?
Been a country artist for over 20 years. I go by KC Beck. Grew up in combination of Denver and Kansas City and bounced back and forth. When I got to the Army, it was like the name just kind of stuck because I was from Kansas City. As everybody knew me, and just kept doing the music. I've been off and on the Texas charts. I had a big following in Canada for a while and Australia for a while, but lately Canada's stopped letting so many American undiscovered artists get on their channels. It's kind of it used to be only Americans getting on there. Now it's like they're really picky. So every once in a while I get some plays up there.
Cool. We'll have to send it out to our audience and see what happens. But no, thanks for coming on. You're obviously not here to talk about music. We're the Electrical Safety Podcast, and it sounds like you've had some interesting stories to tell there. So why don't you just kind of go back as far as you want that makes sense, so people kind of get an idea what it is you're talking about. And
I got injured in the Army, and that kind of got me interested in safety. Right after getting out of the Army, I got an opportunity to go to Iraq and be a contractor. And I worked for a company that's now called ACOM, but it was at the time Lear Sigler Incorporated, with LS or URS was the name of the company. And then from there, at the time, I think they were also called EG&G. They had multiple names, but they were a subcontractor at Keller Brown & Root. I worked with them for the Marine Corps for the first 8 months, and then I switched over to KBR directly, which is Keller Brown & Root, Dick Cheney's old company. And then I started creating a safety program in Tallil, Iraq. And I was doing everything from the POL, which is petroleum, oils, and lubricants. I was the supply guy, admin guy, foreman, acting foreman most of the time. And then when the supervisor was gone, I was the acting superintendent. And we kind of had this really cool shop down in Tallil, Iraq. And there was a lot of issues with safety. And I was like, hey, man, I'd like to get my OSHA 30 class. And the guy was like, well, I really need a safety guy. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. If you'll send me through OSHA 30, I'll do safety. And he was like, okay. So he gave me the radio. And next thing you know, I'm the safety officer for Tallil, Iraq. And then that's over time turned into a full-time safety coordinator position with KBR. And then from there, I became what was called a full paid coordinator, health, safety, environmental coordinator. And I was working for the convoys in Iraq. And early on in that, as I was doing the OSHA 30, they also sent me through a safety coordinator course. And the big focus at the time, which is why I wanted to get on this podcast, had to do with grounding and bonding. And there's a kind of a backstory behind it. And we can get into that in a second. And but basically from there, I went to college for a few years when I got back from Iraq. In 2010. And I wasn't really going to pursue safety. I was going to try to go the law enforcement route, but my health from military and contracting kind of was like, full-time police isn't going to be your thing. And so I went into safety. So I guess there was a 5-year gap. And I've been doing safety ever since. And I've worked on some huge projects in Austin. I've worked on most of the skyscrapers. Now I'm working on water purification plants. I've got a very big one that's about $250,000 or $250 million in Austin, Texas, on Lake Travis, and it's really complex. There's a lot of stuff to it. 300 feet deep, large pipeline that runs under Lake Travis. I mean, it's really cool. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Cool. Yeah. So let's get back to that. You mentioned the grounding and bonding thing, and even just for me, I'm trying to picture what was even going on over there. Like, what was the project? And
so a country the size of Texas, which is Iraq, in the Persian Gulf. It's 140, 150 degrees. I know that they say Death Valley is the hottest place on earth, but I'm telling you that's BS. Anybody who's been to Iraq knows this. And you've got Baghdad in the central, which kind of be like Austin. Then you go up north, and you've got your I want to say Juarez, but that's not the proper name for it. Trying to think of the term for it. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, and then out in the west, you've got the Anbar. Then down south, you've got Basra and Talil, which is where I was kind of at. And then you go a little bit north and a little bit northwest, you've got Joint Base Balad, which was the biggest base in Iraq, and it had a big airfield. And but the biggest thing that happened was down in the green zone in, I want to say 2005, roughly 2005, a sergeant or a staff sergeant, Sergeant Mastiff, was taking a shower, and he got electrocuted. Now, the Army initially tried to cover it up and say, oh, he died in combat. That was BS. And there's a backstory to this whole thing that came out later. And they told his mom he died in combat. Some friends came back and said, your son didn't die in combat. And what actually happened was, and this is where the grounding body comes in, the Rock Island, Illinois Army Contracting Office set in that they were going to use what are called internally grounded pumps. So basically what happens is the shell of the casing, it has to be hooked to something that's grounded, or you're going to have an electrocution problem. And they used an internally grounded pump with PVC. And as you can tell, hey, this is an electric podcast. Most people are going to have a little bit of a background electric. Electricity is going to pick the path of least resistance. PVC is more restrictive than water was. So it went through the water, it shocked him, he dies, and then through investigation and what ended up going to the federal courts later, it actually turned out Kelly Brown & Root had identified this pump ahead of time and said, hey, we want to fix it. The colonel there was quoted as saying something to the effect, my Green Berets my Green Berets are tough or something like that. Well, they were tough, but they couldn't handle 220 electricity, unfortunately. And it's sad that this colonel made that comment and got his guy killed. But the internally grounded pumps go back to the Army was trying to save money with these internally grounded pumps. We're talking like it was like a third or a quarter of the cost. Great for cost savings. Unfortunately, they didn't think about, well, what are we going to plumb it to? And PVC was more readily available at the time than copper piping or iron piping. So the other side of it was, it took a while to identify all this, and how we really identified it was we were part of a quality class related to the contracts. The Brits and the Irish guys and the Scottish guys that we brought over, and a few Australian electricians were brought over, and they were like, here's your problem. And I'm in the class with it, and we're like, wait, what? And it was like, there's your problem. You have internally grounded pumps going with this. The other thing that was wrong about it was the contract called out for, I guess there's two different types of T20s. The T20 in Europe and Canada and the US are different. There's a slight difference between America 220 and the Europeans. So they had this thing of it was going to be American 220 running with 110 electric outlets and 110 wiring. But it was, the whole thing was all mixed up. And the Brits immediately identify this. So like, your hertz are wrong, your voltage is wrong. This whole thing doesn't work. So we had to go to I was there as they were going and asking and trying to get with the Army Contracting Office to change all this, because the contract was calling for something we should not have been doing. And then eventually, by the time I left, we were on base power. So it was actually being run out of Balad, Iraq for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. So, okay, so thanks for kind of going through that. So where my mind goes is this is like almost a construction engineering problem to begin with.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, yeah,
With
so this
human
kind of gets
factor
into a
on
lot
it.
of different things.
Unfortunately, there was a human factor which got the staff sergeant killed. But that opened up kind of a can of worms. And then they were like, because the mom was raising hell, which is good. I totally am glad with her, with what the mom did, because honestly, it affected my career. Like it changed the entire dynamic. And I've been in safety, and I always go back to this investigation, and getting hurt in the military, the way I got hurt, it was preventable. So I look back at it, and what we found out was that year, I think in 2007, 17 people died was the gist of it. And it was roughly around that number for a few years there until they identified this. Then we went on this huge thing because the Army did a corrective action report, which is basically get this fixed or it's $1 million. And every car you get is $1 million. And they keep coming back to it and they keep finding it. And so we would go around and they would basically put a grounding and bonding to the ground of these internally grounded pumps. And that created the path of least resistance. So that way people weren't getting electrocuted.
So you were telling me the mother and what she was doing and how that impacted your career. So
I'm glad that she raised hell on this, because I'm not saying that they would have never fixed it, but it obviously put a kind of put some gas to it. And these 3 and 4 star generals, Mattis and some of those other guys, they had a reason to, hey, let's get this fixed. Yeah, this is wrong. And especially because this was being called like another Pat Tillman. Tillman was killed by friendly fire. This guy was killed by, really, it was his command messed up and didn't get it fixed. And the ironic thing is KBR wasn't the best at keeping documents, but they kept that document. They had proof of the colonel sign deny on doing the work order. And that's the sad part. When you look at this, there's obviously, there's some mechanical, there's some engineering there. That's obviously electrical, but there's the human factor. Somebody denied the work when it wasn't going to cost them anything. It was just a matter of, oh, my Green Berets are tough. So, kind of the nature of special operations, it is cocky, but it got people killed in this case. Now, in the aftermath of this, the grounding and bonding policy in OSHA got changed. There's actually some numbers for OSHA in the United States. There's actually some numbers in there of what the resistance to ground is supposed to be and stuff like that. And it's really neat that a couple years later I had to do this for building the stadium at University of Texas, which is our biggest football stadium in America for football, has the biggest program. And, and I had to do grounding and bonding there and verify that this stud welder on a trailer met to ground. And I'm like, oh, I know all about this. When I tell the guys how I knew, they were like, wow, that's a pretty cool story, So then used a voltmeter, checked everything, and it was all good. But, reading it in black and white, it's like, unfortunately, it's like, the reason it's in there is because people's lives were lost.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So I think I didn't catch that the first go around. So this problem was identified, and then the guy in charge said, oh, it doesn't really matter. If something happens, we can take it. Okay. Yeah. And the thing I'll say about that is that with electricity, I've seen this time and time again, that at the lower voltages, people don't think it's that big of a deal, and they don't realize how easy it is. And basically what it is, you get a shock that goes through your heart, and it really doesn't take that much current at all. It doesn't matter how tough you are, and so, a little bit of education maybe on that part, on his part too. But yeah, so after that incident, now, what was your involvement? Like, were you just around?
So for the initial part, I was around. I went to these classes again. I was in that first class where it was all identified, which was really cool. But then what later happened is, like, I spent my time going building to building. Like, it wasn't just me. There was a team of like 40 of us in the whole country of Iraq. And again, it's about the size of Texas, maybe a little smaller, but you go around and every building, you look at it and you go, okay, there's one of these pipes under this building, which, the pipes, we know they all run the showers and stuff. And you'd verify, is it ground and bonded? So we would go around and do that. Ironically, about a year later, nobody thinks about this, but I'm in a gym of all places, and I know we've got this car going out. And I was a entry-level safety guy for the postal mission, but I'm in a gym, and there's literally a 220 Romex pigtail hanging out of the wall, and it's about, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches away from some guy's leg as he's doing squats. And it's literally just hanging out of the wall. And I'm like, whoa, hey, I go to the lady at the gym. I'm like, stop what we're doing. We need to block this off over here. I'm doing all this. And unbeknownst to me, the quality manager for the whole country of Iraq just happens to be right there watching this whole thing go. After I handle it, he's, man, you did really good handling that and everything. I was like, yeah, he asked my name and stuff. And it was like, no, I'm with TTM, which is the convoy mission. And I'm like, oh, man, I just put in for the safety coordinator job over there. It didn't even click to me, but basically that helped secure my job, the next position I got into. But that the wire hanging there, the sad part is the lady at the gym was just like oblivious to it. She's like, I didn't think that was a big deal. And I'm like, that's 220. That's a sweaty guy, a sweaty soldier over here doing squats. Yes, that's going to very much electrocute him. It's like, so I need you to block this all off. I need you to take care of it, And it was like, it was just, it's so weird that, people were not aware of how dangerous it was, and
yeah,
maybe because I was vigilant, because I was looking for all this stuff, and we had a couple fires and just things that week that I was really paying attention to electric wiring. But, I caught that, they got it fixed, and there was just little things throughout the next year and a half that kept coming up like that.
Yeah. So I've always been curious about that, like with the Army and, organizations that are in very dangerous situations anyway, when it comes to safety, like, does it get treated the same as it would, in like a corporate food plant or something?
When there's, yes, on the military side, it's lacking. And so in the last 15 years, like I say, I got into this around 2007. In the last 15 years, they've really ramped it up. So there's a thing in America, the Army Corps of Engineers policy, EM 385, is kind of the standard for all safety government-wide. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be the Army had a standard that was kind of like out there, the Army followed the Air Force standard for most things. If it was flight line involved, they always followed the Air Force. If they were on the Gulf or where there was water adjacent, they followed the Navy policy. And then the Army had some different guidances out there. Wing safety on all air bases was kind of in charge for safety of anything that was air base related, whether the Army was on it, if it was a joint base, or it was, any flight line. I worked with wing safety a lot in Iraq, and I got my fire marshal with them and everything else. But it was interesting because it was all so many different regs. And in some cases, you pull up the Air Force or the Army little pamphlet on it. It's like, nope, we can't do it. But then it's like, hey, but the Navy says we can do this. So you'd send that in and be like, there's the reg. If you wanted to stop working, we're like, I know this is dangerous, but I got no authority to stop it. You would find it either in OSHA, the Army's reg, the Navy's reg, the Air Force. Well, now that they've combined it into EM 385, it's a lot simpler. You have one cohesive rule across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, the rules are one thing, and then it's the culture, and do they follow them, and all that stuff. So that's,
I mean, they've stepped it up. I will say they've stepped it up, but like in Iraq, literally KBR, and over time, they also had Dynacorp get in there, and they had URS. They provided safety coordinators, and we were there to augment the military. The military on the Army side had no safety guys. Since then, they've added like a corporate safety guy for the Army. They've added more Corps of Engineer guys to every contract, and it's fragmented though. You also had DCMA, which is Defense Contract Management Agency, which they were there to make sure that the contracts were managed safely. But it's like it's really weird how it all kind of, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, you check on this, and I check on that, and it was like everything was fragmented. But in the recent years, I've met more safety guys that are actually going through OSHA training and stuff like that here in the States, or getting specific trainings. Like if it's an engineering unit, they might get training on concrete and paving and stuff like that. So they're getting that safety, but it's still fragmented.
So I guess from there, in going back to, you mentioned that like that incident really impacted your career. What was it that, what was the change for you, or what, how did it impact?
A little bit. So in 2004, I tried out for Special Forces on the National Guard side. The U.S. Army has a kind of a National Guard, a few National Guard and Reserve units that are Special Forces. I'd say almost to the point of obsessed. I used to ruck march hundreds of miles a week, maybe hundreds of miles a month. Every once in a while, I do like 2 days straight of just nonstop ruck marching, and at 25 miles an hour, roughly, 25 miles, at 4 miles an hour, you add it up. So you kind of do the math on it, in a week, you could get a couple hundred miles. And I would do that every day because I wanted to go to selections and all this. But then I got hurt, and it was like, but I still kept up trying to do it. And it was unrealistic at that point because I'm going to be permanently crippled, but didn't know that until later. I was just trying to fight anatomy at that point, or biology. But I was very involved with that, knew lots of people in the SF community and stuff. So for me, it was like, this is this community I wanted to be a part of. And then when I have this happen, like I'm involved with it, and I'm actually out helping fix it, all because this Green Beret dies. And he's about my age, and my partner in Iraq also was a retired Green Beret. And an ex-stepfather was a Green Beret. So it was like, there's this, kind of thing with that community. And it's kind of, it's really unfortunate that it happened, but it opened my eyes to it. And then I started looking for it. And since I've been in safety, there's been multiple times I found electrical issues or some other IDLH, immediate danger to life and health. And you just fix them on the spot,
Yeah. Yeah. So the other question I was thinking about was, this was a grounding and bonding issue. And you mentioned like the other, the pigtail kind of sticking out of the wall. That would just be something that should be decommissioned or something like that.
Yeah.
Are there other, like I'm just thinking like when they're doing actual electrical work, and is there arc flash problems and things like that? Like, do you see that?
States, I don't know how Canada is, if it's the same. I've heard you guys actually kind of go above and beyond on that. I haven't heard that Canada's necessarily going to the level of NEBOSH policies, but I've heard, I've kind of looked at some of your regs on certain things. And, like you'll Google, you'll be like, hey, what's the rate say on this? And you'll accidentally get like the law from Canada. And you look it over, you're like, oh man, this is good. And you're like, oh, it's the Canadian law. And it's just how it is as a safety guy. You're trying to find that law, you're trying to find something on it. But then sometimes you also get incorporated by reference. Like you guys will use some other, where you guys reference that, hey, the US law says this. And you're like, oh, there we go, I got something. And, so over years, I've kind of looked at some of those. You guys seem to have a better policy on that. And I know a lot of our lineman companies have been bought out or have partnered with Canadian companies, like Primoris, for instance. You guys had this big corporation up there that they bought, and then they've incorporated all that technology into what's down here. So I think overall on a safety side, both Canada and US are getting safer together with that technology and that experience, it's just something I've seen. But we still have a lot of old 100-year-old, like those giant switch boxes that you have to kick over. I mean, it's almost like kicking over an old 70s Triumph motorcycle. And you got to slam it, and there's an arc flash that happens. And they're designed that way.